I'll be talking on a meaningful cure for the ramifications of Cartesian substance on modern science and society. Mainstream science emphasizes the role of random chance as a primary causal factor for our existence. Inevitably, this line of thought concludes that reality is inherently meaningless and suggests that people should create their own purpose, thus reinforcing thinking patterns and behavior which nurture self-centeredness. Self-centeredness nurtures the perceived isolation, which plagues many people worldwide. Cartesian substance is a main contributor to the metaphysical foundation of the modern scientific paradigm, which perpetuates this worldview and its societal byproducts. Aspects of, mainly, Kant and Spinoza's philosophy serve to rectify these ramifications by emphasizing the necessity of considering the context of the whole reality in order to properly recognize the meaning which permeates our existence. It is generally understood that modern thought began with René Descartes. The impact of Descartes' philosophy has strongly influenced modern scientific paradigm, and as a result, it has influenced the metaphysical basis for the worldview of our society. Quote, in a 2017 Research America market research survey, 67% of the respondents indicated that they strongly agree, or somewhat agree, that public policies should be based on the best available science, and that 86% of respondents agreed that it is either very or somewhat important for scientists to inform elected officials and the public about their research and its impact. Scientific knowledge has a strong influence within society, and since Cartesian substance is the metaphysical foundation of scientific thought, the implications of substance dualism have consequently shaped the dominant perspective of society. This is exemplified by Brian Green, director of Columbia University's Center for Theoretical Physics, who claims that, quote, we have used ingenuity and perseverance to touch the very limits of outer and inner space. As we hurtle toward a cold and barren cosmos, we must accept that there is no grand design. Particles are not endowed with purpose. There is no final answer hovering in the depths of space awaiting discovery. End quote. This statement, which claims that reality is inherently purposeless, encourages the kind of self-reliance which nurtures the false ego and an artificial sense of isolation that perpetuates unnecessary suffering throughout society. The metaphysical foundation of Green's position is a ramification of Cartesian substance. Of infinite substance, God, and two finite substances, extended matter, res extensa, and mind, res cogitans. He says that, quote, the infinite substance depends on nothing but itself, while created substances depend on nothing but God for their existence, end quote. Descartes' philosophy is characterized by substance dualism, which creates the hard problem of consciousness discussed by David Chalmers in The Conscious Mind, and the mind-body problem. He asserts that matter and mind are two distinct substances which are completely separate from each other. At the end of his meditations, Descartes justifies his real distinction between mind and matter by pointing out that the body is inherently divisible and the mind cannot be divided. Descartes elaborates that parts of the body may be cut off, yet the mind remains intact. Furthermore, faculties of the mind, such as willing, understanding, or sense perception, cannot be severed from the mind because they are not tangible parts of it. Descartes assumes that differences in the apparent manifestation of body and mind equates to an essential separation between the two. Matter is only physically divisible precisely because it is extended in space. Mind is not extended in space, thus it is not physically divisible. But this does not prove that matter and mind are not connected. When using the term connection, we mean, quote, a relationship in which a person, thing, or idea is linked or associated with something else, where association means the values of one variable generally co-occur with certain values of the other. While it is true that Descartes admitted that mind and body interact with each other, association and interaction are not the same. Quote, if two variables interact, they may or may not be associated. Descartes' position regarding the lack of connection between mind and body is like saying that the moon and ocean are completely separate from each other because the moon is not liquid. Yet it is well known that the moon and ocean are intimately connected through the inherent effect of gravity. The gravitational influence of the moon causes the tides of the ocean. Similarly, since the body is an effect of the mind, the influence of the mind causes the behavior of the body. In his sixth meditation, while considering the faulty nature of his senses, Descartes concludes that the proper use of the senses is to determine what is beneficial for the mind-body complex, but not to determine the essential natures of bodies which are external to his own. Quote, "Bodies may not all correspond exactly with my sensory intake of them, for much of what comes in through the senses is obscure and confused. But at least bodies have all the properties that I clearly and distinctly understand, that is, all that fall within the province of pure mathematics." End quote. Descartes considers mathematics to describe the truth of extended substance. He deduces that extended matter is that which is really different or external from him. Descartes accepts certain primary qualities as belonging to matter, such as shape, size, and motion. Furthermore, he holds that secondary qualities such as color, taste, and smell do not belong to matter, but to the consciousness of the observer. After isolating extended matter from mind and ascribing certain qualities to either matter or mind, Descartes continued to separate his perceived reality. He applied what came to be known as the Cartesian plane or the coordinate system to the concept of Euclidean space. This allowed all extended matter, which is equated to the universe and sometimes multiverse, to be scrutinizingly analyzed in terms of shape, size, motion, and interaction. It is inappropriate to analyze the universe in these purely physical ways, because the universe also contains thinking living beings. Philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn mentions that Descartes' immensely influential scientific writings told scientists what sort of entities the universe did and did not contain. There was only shaped matter in motion, and it told them laws must specify corpuscular motion and interaction, and explanation must reduce any given natural phenomena to corpuscular action under these laws. End quote. Descartes' tendency of continually tearing perceived reality into separate parts has given rise to reductionism and the mathematical thinking which permeates modern mechanistic science. Generally, anything that does not fall into the scope of the primary qualities, such as qualia, is ignored by science. The conceptual framework which has guided modern science up until now must be reevaluated to be inclusive of mind. Modern scientists, such as theoretical physicist Brian Greene, seem to be overwhelmingly convinced by the impersonal and unmeaningful implications of a scientific approach which only considers size, shape, motion, and interaction of extended matter, devoid of their inherent connection with mind. This results in the propagation of knowledge which tells people that the progression of nature is guided by random chance and that there is no inherent purpose to reality. The popular response to this misguided perspective of reality seems to be for individuals to strive to create their own purpose, which nurtures self-centered behavior. Modern psychology acknowledges that by, quote, targeting self-centeredness as a part of an intervention to lessen loneliness may help break a positive feedback loop that maintains or worsens loneliness over years, end quote. This connection between self-centeredness and loneliness contributes to the isolation individuals experience as a result of becoming anchored into their own personal perspective of reality, instead of striving to harmonize their thoughts and actions with the context of the whole reality within which they participate. A pattern of separation and isolation is perpetuated within the line of experience which follows the direction of Descartes' metaphysics. Immanuel Kant makes a distinction between the noumenal, the thing in itself, and the phenomenal, the thing as it appears to the senses of a conscious observer. It is rational and quite humble to make this distinction. By rational, I mean thought which follows a logical progression within a systematic framework, grounded in direct experience, which considers the whole reality of which we are part. For one to assume that their sensuous perception of reality equates to how reality actually is, as Descartes and many others do, is conjecture. It is more rational to conclude that what we perceive through the senses is only how reality seems or appears to us, and that there is a true reality which is appearing. Our limitation to only perceive the appearance of things is exemplified in optical illusions, such as the young woman, old woman ambiguous figure, where observers look at this common image and either see an old or young woman. Due to the flawed nature of our senses, as Descartes rightly acknowledges, we cannot perceive the noumenal reality, yet through deduction, we may thoughtfully recognize that it must be there. Descartes emphasized that shape, size, and motion were the subject matter of a mathematized and mechanistic science. This was done based on the assumption that these primary qualities represented how external reality, extended substance, truly was. Considering the Kantian perspective, these primary qualities are no more or less phenomenal than the secondary qualities previously mentioned, such as color, taste, and smell, since the noumenal cannot be known. Thus, all observations of nature are known as phenomena. Werner Heisenberg, a theoretical physicist who assisted in pioneering quantum mechanics, recognizes that, quote, "We cannot disregard the fact that natural science is formed by men. Natural science does not simply describe and explain nature. It is part of the interplay between nature and ourselves. It describes nature as exposed to our method of questioning. This was a possibility of which Descartes could not have thought." When we consider aspects of Kant's point of view, the meaning or reason which is inherent in reality starts to become clear. The word that Kant uses here is Naturzweck, meaning internal purpose. His philosophy, quote, stresses the central role of reason as an activity instituting a world and addresses an a priori synthesis as a production of forms. What acquires objective reality in this production is not an object, but the form any object will assume. This is not, therefore, an actual intuition, but the synthesis of possible objects in experience. This process produces universal concepts which particular objective manifestations participate in. For example, fruit is a universal concept, and a particular apple in the grocery store is the objective manifestation. It is simple to hand someone a fruit because it is just it is impossible. It is impossible to hand someone substantial, but you can hand them any particular objective manifestation of fruit, such as the apple. Fruit is the essence of the apple. An apple is a fruit, yet fruit is not an apple, because fruit means grapes, pears, apples, and etc. This pattern applies to all objective bodies. So, what is that substantial universal concept that we, all living beings, are particular manifestations of? Baruch Spinoza had a genuine appreciation for Descartes' philosophy and sought to improve upon those aspects which seemed irrational to him. Spinoza had the insight to recognize the indivisible nature of mind and extended matter. Due to this, Spinoza was able to clarify a point which Descartes did not grasp, that res cogitans and res extensa are attributes of a singular substance which contains differentiation. This substance monism is not to be confused with the idea of an eleactic one in which all differentiation is dissolved. The following excerpt briefly references Spinoza's short treatise on God, man, and his well-being. The personality of lust represents Descartes' philosophy, while reason represents Spinoza's. Here you may see how the differentiation within Spinoza's substance monism actually accounts for the infinite nature of God, whereas Descartes' dualism places a restriction or finitude on that which Descartes himself understands to be unlimited or infinite. Quote, lust defines such diverse things, sensing, understanding, not as different substances, but as modes of an underlying thinking substance, which lust claims exists independently, or at least depending only on God. Reason remarks that lust should not stop there. Lust should be consistent and understand that thought itself is not a substance, but is something that exists in the only substance or being, God. In order to make his argument clearer, reason adopts lust's own terminology. When reason says that the infinite extension and thought, together with other infinite attributes, or as you would say substances, are nothing but modes, he does so in order to clarify that the entities that lust called substances are in reality nothing but attributes. Spinoza holds that the singular infinite substance is the absolute or God, and that absolute contains infinite differentiated attributes within it, of which we are finite living beings, can conceive only extended matter and mind. Spinoza's conception of substance contributes to a metaphysical framework which is better suited to establish a scientific approach which recognizes and embraces the indivisible nature of mind and matter as aspects of an infinite substance. His conception also aligns more cohesively with Kant's position that meaning or reason is inherently in reality. That pure reason emanates from the infinite substance, the supreme being, God, and extends throughout his infinite differentiated forms or attributes, such as mind and matter. Descartes' position also recognizes the pure reason of the infinite substance, but his mistake in partitioning mind and matter has greatly contributed to our modern social and scientific paradigm, which views reality as inherently meaningless. When we critically examine the subtle minutiae of our experienced reality, we become aware of natural laws which govern the movement of bodies. Law implies something fairly consistent and systematic in nature. The recognition of law calls for the necessity of reason. Discrepancies arise, however, regarding the nature of a purposeful reason. Brian Greene believes that, quote, by the grace of random chance funneled through nature's laws, we are here, end quote. Yet Sir Isaac Newton, considered the father of modern science, understood that, quote, this most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. This being governs all things not as the soul of the world, but as Lord over all, and on account of his dominion, he is wont to be called Lord God, Pantocrator, or universal ruler, end quote. Is random chance and natural law truly enough to create an organized and useful structure, such as the mechanical system, which is our solar system? If you go to a beach and randomly throw sand in the air, will it fall into the form of a sandcastle? No, it will obey natural laws such as gravity and fall to the ground. Something more than random chance and natural law is necessary to build a sandcastle or any mechanical system. The intelligence of a conscious designer is necessary. Mainstream modern thought has embraced a metaphysical foundation which leads to the conclusion that reality is inherently meaningless. However, this very foundation was laid upon faulty grounds. By artificially partitioning extended matter from mind, Descartes lost sight of the infinite whole, which he himself acknowledged. He began to focus on the parts within the context of the whole. He began to focus on the parts without the context of the whole, which compounded into further fragmentation of perceived reality. This pattern of behavior has significantly contributed to nurturing the modern reductionist and mechanistic approach, which permeates modern science, thus nurturing the egocentric tendencies and perceived isolation of individuals throughout modern science. Alfredo Ferrarin, professor of philosophy at University of Pisa, points out that, quote, if the whole is prior to the parts, no question is intelligible in isolation, in and of itself. No rational activity can be pursued independently of the larger picture, the guiding ideas it has to fit into. If the whole is immanent in all parts, internally present to them, then reason's ends cannot be bracketed. This is, the rational ends which we ignore are those we simply have forgotten, end quote. Thus, the position of modern science regarding meaning in reality is a result of forgetting the context within which it participates as an observer. Bhaktimadhava Puri, serving director of the Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute, emphasizes an aspect of the infinite whole which is not commonly considered. Quote, in reality, it is the final end, purpose, or that for the sake of which things exist, that determines and guides all other factors. When the unity of the whole is sentient or self-conscious, even a systems approach will not be sufficient to explain its existence. Systems are not self-conscious. Without knowing the purpose for an individual's own self-conscious existence, one has only a false conception of self, false ego. One's true identity is established only when it's comprehended in relation to a proper concept of the complete whole. This complete whole is the all-accommodating, all-pervading, all-unifying, all-attracting, self-conscious, and self-knowing absolute truth, who is known by many names, end quote. The Bhagavad Vedanta philosophy provides a robust conception of the personal, self-conscious nature of the absolute truth. Bhagavat refers to the Supreme Person, and Vedanta means the end of knowledge. So, the wisdom of scriptures such as the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam discusses the end or purpose of pursuing various kinds of knowledge and paths of action in relation to the Supreme Person, the infinite whole. This harmonizes with the higher development of Kant's philosophy of noumenal reality, the thing in itself. The personal noumenal reality is the original reason behind the a priori synthesis which produces forms. That substantial universal concept that we, all living beings, are particular manifestations of and participate in is the Supreme Personality. absolute thinking activity. We may not see the form of the absolute in front of us, just like we do not see fruit. Our senses only perceive those particular objective manifestations which participate in the universal concept, like the apple. Spinoza recognizes the absolute to be self-caused, causa sui, and knows the absolute as infinite substance. G.W.F. Hegel understands the higher development of Spinoza's conception. Hegel recognizes that the absolute is not only substance, but also subject. This corresponds to the Bhagavad Vedanta philosophy and may be developed later or in a future paper. For the purposes of this paper, it is relevant to consider that the infinite whole of reality, God, is the supreme personality. This personality is the absolute truth or whole, which manifests in infinite ways or parts, such as mind, res cogitans, and matter, res extensa. As a result of the metaphysics which has dominated the world, our modern global culture has a tendency to be compartmentalized. This manifests in a multitude of ways, such as the external competition of separate nations, corporations, families, and individuals, as well as the internal ways we perceive reality and respond to other viewpoints which seem to oppose or threaten our own. This causal sequence originates from a lack of education, which recognizes our position as a part of the infinite whole. Mainstream modern science, which is supposed to be a rational and systematic approach to gathering knowledge about reality, heavily influences the dominant social paradigm and the zeitgeist, or spirit of the times. If modern science can embrace a metaphysics which recognizes the inseparable relationship between mind and matter and progress in a rational manner, then both science and society will develop a harmonious conception of true reality within the context of the infinite whole. This is not suggesting a transition from dualism to monism, but rather to transcend the framework of thesis versus antithesis by realizing a new synthesis, which can consider a dialectic oneness in difference. This shift in perspective will allow us to navigate life in a much more meaningful way. And I'll just end with this poem by John Donne. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well if a promontory were, as well as any manner of thy friends, or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. My Dandavats to Sripad Bhaktimananda Puri Maharaj and to Srila Bhakti Nirmalacharya Maharaj, all of the participants, all of the guests, all of the devotees, please accept my humble respects.
Thank you, Siman Krishna Kesava Prabhu. So very nice, presentation. Is there anybody have any questions to Krishna Kesava Prabhu they wants to ask?
Kashyap Basavara, can I ask, start that?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, nice talk. Thank you. But you see, you kind of complained that science has a dominant part in the world, but that is because it works. When virus come, people are looking at scientists to find vaccine. And but my point is that let's collaborate between the two methods. Scientists cannot give up their empirical method because that is the basis of science. We do not believe in relativity because the big man Einstein wrote in the book. It has to be verified by experiments. So my question to you, Krishnaji, is do you think empirical methods have any role to play in your understanding?
So thank you for your question. I'm definitely not saying that science is to abandon empirical methods or experimentation, but science should not exclude conclusions that connects the ability to have empirical observations to mind and the higher development of mind and ego, intelligence, to the soul and the soul's relationship with God. If conclusions start to even remotely go in that direction and are stopped because it doesn't fit into the picture that people want science to play, then that's a problem. And that's where I think a lot of the problems we're talking about have come up. Not that it has to stop being empirical or it has to stop doing experiments. That's the nature of science. But if it wants to actually consider reality as a complete whole, then it cannot exclude that other subjective part.
Yeah, that is why I'm saying the only solution is for both the parties to collaborate. And I am proposing some experiments, but I'm just too old, and I'm in USA and I cannot travel to India and so on, and so I need a lot of help from Indian listeners, and so the people should consider neuroscience instruments and experiments to look into mind. And now we may be wrong, by the way. That is okay. Scientists don't have any problem. Every minute they withdraw their beliefs. It is not, science does not stand stationary for 10,000 years. Every time it can change. So the thing is to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think, is there anything you want to add, Krishna Keshav Prabhu, before we move on to next speaker?
No, Maharaj.
Okay. So we thank Sriman Krishna Keshav Prabhu for his nice presentation, and Professor Kashyap, we wish you well with your experiment on yogis. I'm not sure how far you can move through those experiments towards understanding the realization or transcendence that yogis experience beyond body, to go to mind and then intellect to ego and to layer of turiya. I'm not sure how your instrument's going to help in that direction, but I think you should put yourself in the laboratory to test, to experience those things. That will be best thing. Scientists are doing experiments with everything, but they're not putting themselves in the experiment. That is the problem with them. So somehow they have to learn that, how to put themselves into that experimental testing circumstances.
Yeah.
So that's why we are organizing science and scientists. Science should not ignore scientists. So anyway, we thank you very much for that and
thank
in
you.
your endeavor.
The problem is, just a quick comment, is that most scientists are not yogis. And that is why we need yogis. And
Yes.
most yogis are not scientists. So that is the problem.
Yes.
And we cannot give up science.
We cannot understand consciousness with something that is a product of consciousness. Only consciousness can understand consciousness. So that we have to realize also. So that is a very important thing. So anyway, we have lack of time. We have to move to the next speaker, Dr. Subhasini. She could not speak because her computer